there's a loneliness that intelligent people carry that no one talks about. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but a deeper, more profound isolation. The loneliness of living in a world where very few people think the way you think, feel the way you feel, see what you see. The loneliness of being surrounded by people, but feeling fundamentally alone anyway. If you've ever felt this, if you've ever wondered why connection seems so difficult, why conversations feel shallow, why you can have a room full of people and still feel isolated, tonight is for you. Because what you're experiencing isn't a flaw. It's not a failure of personality. It's a specific type of loneliness that comes with seeing more, thinking deeper, and questioning everything. And it's more common than you think, and more painful than most people understand. Tonight, we're going to explore why intelligent people struggle with loneliness in ways that others don't. Not to make you feel better with false comfort, but to help you understand what's actually happening and why it matters. Let's begin. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a breath. And think about the last meaningful conversation you had. Not small talk, not surface pleasantries, but a real conversation where you felt seen, where you felt understood, where you didn't have to translate yourself or simplify your thoughts or pretend to be less than you are. How long ago was it? Weeks, months, years? For many intelligent people, truly connecting conversations are rare. Painfully rare. So rare that when they do happen, they feel almost miraculous. And the rest of the time, there's this quiet ache. This sense of being on the outside looking in, of speaking a language that no one else quite understands, of having thoughts and insights that have nowhere to go because there's no one to share them with who will really get it. This isn't about being superior. This isn't about thinking you're better than others. That's not what this loneliness is about at all. It's about existing in a different cognitive space, operating at a different frequency, and finding very few people who operate at that same frequency. Let me explain what I mean by sharing what researchers have found about intelligence and social connection. Studies consistently show that as IQ increases, social satisfaction tends to decrease. People with higher intelligence report feeling lonely more often, having fewer close friendships, and struggling more with social integration. There's even data suggesting that highly intelligent people are happiest when they have less social interaction, not because they're antisocial, but because most social interaction is exhausting rather than energizing for them. Why? What's happening here? The primary reason is cognitive gap. The difference in how you process information, how quickly you make connections, how deeply you analyze, creates a fundamental communication barrier. When you're having a conversation with someone operating at a very different cognitive level, it's like speaking different languages that happen to use the same words. You're thinking 3 steps ahead. They're still on step 1. You're seeing patterns and implications. They're seeing surface details. You're questioning assumptions. They're accepting them without thought. And that gap, that difference, creates isolation. Not because either person is bad or wrong, but because genuine connection requires mutual understanding. And mutual understanding requires similar cognitive processing. Think about it this way. Imagine you love classical music. You hear the layers, the complexity, the emotional depth, the technical skill. It moves you profoundly. Now imagine trying to share that with someone who only hears noise, who doesn't understand what you're responding to, who thinks you're being pretentious or overthinking it. You can explain what you hear, but they won't hear it the way you do. The experience you're having is fundamentally inaccessible to them. That's what cognitive gap feels like in everyday interaction. You're experiencing depth, nuance, complexity, and the person across from you isn't accessing those layers. They're in a different space entirely. And when this happens repeatedly across most of your interactions, you start to feel profoundly alone, even when surrounded by people. The second reason intelligent people experience this particular loneliness is what psychologists call existential isolation. Intelligent people tend to think more about big questions, about meaning, about mortality, about the nature of existence, about whether anything we do actually matters. These aren't comfortable questions. Most people avoid them. They stay busy, stay distracted, stay focused on immediate concerns and daily routines. But if you're intelligent, if you're reflective, these questions don't stay buried. They surface, especially at night, especially when you're alone with your thoughts. And when you try to talk about these things with most people, you get uncomfortable silence or dismissive responses, or people trying to quickly move to lighter topics. You think too much. Why do you worry about things you can't control? Just enjoy life. Don't overthink it. But you can't just not think about these things. Your mind doesn't work that way. And so you carry these questions, these contemplations, these existential uncertainties alone, because sharing them makes people uncomfortable. And you learn over time to keep them to yourself. The third reason is the curse of pattern recognition. Intelligent people see patterns everywhere. Patterns in behavior, patterns in systems, patterns in how things work and why things happen. This is a gift in many ways. It helps you understand the world. It helps you anticipate outcomes. It helps you solve problems. But it also means you see patterns in people that they don't see in themselves. You understand why they do what they do, often before they understand it themselves. And this creates a strange dynamic. You're watching people play out predictable patterns, and you can see it coming, but they can't. Or they don't want to see it. You watch someone make the same mistake repeatedly. You see the pattern. You understand the underlying issue, but they're not ready to see it. And if you point it out, you become the problem. So you stay quiet. You watch. You understand. But you can't connect. Because true connection requires the other person to also see what you see. And they often don't. The fourth reason is the need for intellectual stimulation. For highly intelligent people, conversations need to offer something. Not entertainment necessarily, but engagement, challenge, new perspectives, depth. Small talk is actively painful. Gossip feels meaningless. Surface-level discussion about weather or sports or celebrity news feels like a waste of limited time and mental energy. You need conversations that make you think, that challenge your assumptions, that introduce new ideas, that go deep rather than wide. But most people don't have conversations like that. Most people use conversation for social bonding, for passing time, for maintaining relationships, not for exploring ideas. And when you consistently need more from conversation than others are offering or seeking, you end up disappointed, frustrated, lonely. You have all this intellectual energy, all these thoughts and questions and ideas, and nowhere to direct them, no one to explore them with. The fifth reason, and this one is harder to admit, is that intelligent people often develop protective mechanisms that make connection even harder. When you've been misunderstood enough times, when you've had enough experiences of trying to connect and failing, when you've felt enough times like you're speaking a language no one else understands, you start to protect yourself. You become selective, guarded. You stop trying as hard. You stop sharing as much. You keep your deeper thoughts to yourself. You develop a social mask, a simplified version of yourself that's easier for others to interact with. And you wear that mask so often that the real you, the complex, deep, questioning you, stays hidden almost all the time. And this protective strategy works in one sense. It reduces the pain of constant misunderstanding. It makes social interaction more manageable, but it also deepens the loneliness. Because now you're not just lonely because others don't understand you. You're lonely because you're actively hiding who you are. You're surrounded by by people who think they know you, but they only know the mask. The real you is more isolated than ever. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer understood this deeply. He wrote about what he called the hedgehog's dilemma. Imagine hedgehogs on a cold night. They want to get close to each other for warmth, but when they do, their spines hurt each other, so they move apart. But then they're cold again, so they try to find the optimal distance, close enough for some warmth, but far enough to avoid the pain. This is what intelligent people often do with connection. Close enough to not be completely isolated, far enough to avoid the pain of being truly seen and still not understood. But that optimal distance, that compromise, it leaves you chronically lonely, not completely isolated, but never truly connected either. Now, I want to address something important. This type of loneliness often comes with guilt and shame, because society tells you that if you're lonely, it's your fault. You're not social enough. You're not trying hard enough. You're too picky. You're too negative. You're not putting yourself out there. And when you're intelligent, people add another layer. You think you're too good for others. You're arrogant. You need to come down from your ivory tower. But that's not what this is. This isn't about superiority. This isn't about judgment. This is about cognitive compatibility. This is about operating at a frequency where there are fewer people to connect with. Imagine being left-handed in a world designed for right-handed people. Everything is slightly harder, slightly awkward, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because the world isn't designed for how you naturally operate. That's what this loneliness is like. The social world is designed for a certain cognitive norm, and if you're significantly above that norm, everything is slightly harder, slightly more awkward, not because you're wrong, but because you're operating differently than most of the world around you. So let's talk about what this means practically. What do you do with this understanding? How do you navigate this reality? First, you stop blaming yourself. You stop thinking that your loneliness means something is wrong with you. Yes, maybe you could be more social. Maybe you could try harder to connect. Maybe you could lower your standards for what constitutes meaningful conversation. But the fundamental issue isn't about trying harder. It's about cognitive compatibility. And that's not something you can force or fake. You can't make yourself less intelligent to fit in better. You can't unsee patterns once you've seen them. You can't stop asking deep questions just because they make others uncomfortable. And trying to do so, trying to make yourself smaller or simpler or less complex to make others comfortable, that's not the solution. That just adds inauthenticity to the loneliness. Second, you get strategic about connection. You stop expecting most people to fulfill your need for deep intellectual and emotional connection. You accept that most people in your life will be pleasant acquaintances, friendly colleagues, people you can have surface-level interactions with that are perfectly fine, but not deeply satisfying. And that's okay. You don't need everyone to be a deep connection, but you do need to find a few people, even just one or two, who operate at your frequency, who think the way you think, who want the conversations you want to have. And this requires intentional seeking. You're not going to randomly run into these people at a party or a coffee shop. The statistical probability is too low. You need to go where thoughtful people gather. Philosophy meetups, book clubs focused on complex literature, academic environments, online communities built around deep discussion. You need to be deliberate about finding your people, because they exist. They're rare, but they exist. And finding even one person who truly gets you can make all the difference. Third, you develop a relationship with solitude that's healthy rather than painful. For many intelligent people, solitude isn't the problem. Solitude can actually be deeply satisfying. The problem is feeling lonely even when you're around people. So instead of fighting your need for solitude, instead of trying to force yourself to be more social when it feels exhausting, you embrace it. You create a life that honors your need for time alone, for space to think, for freedom from the constant cognitive translation required in most social interaction. You read, you write, you think, you create. You engage with ideas through books and articles and content that stimulates you in ways that most conversation doesn't. And you stop feeling guilty about preferring this. You stop believing that something is wrong with you for finding more satisfaction in a good book than in most social gatherings. Solitude becomes something you choose rather than something you're forced into. And that shift in perspective changes everything. Fourth, when you do find people who get you, you invest deeply in those connections. Intelligent people often have fewer friendships, but the friendships they do tend to be deeper, more meaningful, more enduring. You don't need a large social circle. You need a few people who really understand you, who challenge you, who make you feel less alone in how you see the world. And when you find those people, you prioritize them. You nurture those connections. You show up for them in ways that matter, because these connections are rare and valuable. They're what makes the loneliness bearable. They're proof that you're not completely alone in your experience. Fifth, you find ways to contribute your intelligence that feel meaningful. One of the painful aspects of this type of loneliness is feeling like your mind, your insights, your way of thinking has nowhere to go. Like it's all locked inside you with no outlet. So you create outlets. You write, you teach, you mentor, you create content. You engage in work that uses your cognitive gifts in ways that feel purposeful. This doesn't solve the loneliness of personal connection, but it addresses the loneliness of feeling like your intelligence is wasted or invisible. When you find ways to share what you see, what you understand, what you think, even if it's not in traditional social connection, it helps. It gives your inner world a place to exist outside of yourself. Sixth, and this is crucial, you develop compassion for yourself around this loneliness. This pain you feel, this isolation, it's not a personal failing. It's not evidence that you're broken or wrong or too difficult. It's the natural consequence of being cognitively different from most of the population. And that's hard. It's genuinely difficult. You're allowed to grieve that difficulty. You're allowed to feel sad about it. You're allowed to wish it were easier. And you're also allowed to appreciate what comes with your intelligence. The depth of understanding, the richness of inner life, the ability to see and think and question in ways that create meaning even in difficulty. Both can be true. This can be lonely and hard, and it can also be valuable and meaningful. Now, I want to share something personal, because I think it might help you feel less alone in this. I spent years feeling broken because I couldn't connect the way other people seemed to connect so easily. I would watch people have effortless social interactions, forming friendships quickly, finding belonging in groups, and I couldn't understand why that was so hard for me. I tried to be more social. I tried to be interested in the things others were interested in. I tried to have the conversations others wanted to have, but it always felt like I was performing, like I was translating myself constantly, like I was speaking a second language that I could manage, but never felt natural. And the loneliness of that was profound. Not just being alone, but being surrounded by people and still feeling completely isolated. It wasn't until I understood this pattern, this connection between intelligence and loneliness, that things shifted, not because the loneliness went away, but because I stopped thinking it meant something was wrong with me. I realized I was looking for my people in the wrong places. I was expecting cognitive compatibility in contexts where it was statistically unlikely. So I got strategic. I found online communities of people who think deeply about things. I found a few friends who operate at my frequency. I built a life that honors my need for solitude while also creating space for rare but meaningful connection. And the loneliness didn't disappear, it became bearable because I understood it, and I stopped fighting against my own nature. I share this because I want you to know, if you're experiencing this, you're not alone in feeling alone. There are others like you, spread out, statistically rare, but real. And we understand. We get it. We feel this too. The late night thoughts, the conversations that go nowhere, the sense of being fundamentally different, the exhaustion of constant translation, the loneliness of being seen but not understood. We know, and you're not broken. You're just operating at a frequency where there are fewer people. And that's hard, and that's real, and it's okay to struggle with it. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, I want you to try something. Instead of fighting your loneliness, instead of judging yourself for it, just acknowledge it. Say to yourself, this is hard. Being this way in a world designed for a different way is genuinely difficult. And I'm doing the best I can. And then remind yourself, there are others like me. We're rare, but we exist, and we understand. You don't have to have it all figured out tonight. You don't have to solve the loneliness tonight. You just have to be gentle with yourself about it. You just have to remember that it's not a personal failure. It's a statistical reality. And you're navigating it with as much grace as anyone could. Tomorrow night, I'll be here again. Another exploration. Another recognition that you're not alone in your experience, even when you feel completely alone. But tonight, rest. Let the weight of trying so hard to fit, trying so hard to connect in ways that don't work for you, let it go just for tonight. You're exactly as you should be. Complex, deep, thoughtful, questioning. And somewhere out there, there are others like you. And they're glad you exist, even if you haven't found each other yet. Sleep well, nocturnal mind. You're understood here, even in the loneliness, especially in the loneliness.